I'm Ben Hagan. I'm a consultant in renewable energy and energy efficiency policy. My recent work has been related to developing regulatory framework for off-grid solutions to expand energy access in Africa.
Amazing, that's wonderful. And given this background, we're speaking about just transitions and green transitions. And you've mentioned renewable energy and energy efficiency. So there's an emissions reduction element and there's also an energy efficiency element. So I wondered if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Well, the transition has become a necessity, and there's no turning back on that. But whilst we are doing it, we always have to be sure that the trade-offs that necessarily have to come with it does not make life more difficult than it is now, particularly for the vulnerable, for the young people, for those who are not in very well paying jobs, for women, and also for children in general. And so the transition, whilst we are mobilizing everybody to get on board, we also need to assure everybody that it is good for our future, but the trade-offs will be managed to make sure we still live comfortably whilst the transition is going on. And that is why we keep on using the word doing the transition in a very just and equitable way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've explained that so well. It's about making sure, not only about making sure no one is left behind, but managing the gains and losses and,
Yes.
and the trade-offs. Okay, so I wondered if you could perhaps give us some insight into some of the policies that African governments have been taking towards improving renewable energy access and energy efficiency.
Good. I'll start with the renewable energy powered electricity provision. First of all, the technologies until recently had been slightly more expensive than the conventional generation technologies. But with the gradual growth of the market, particularly as solar PVs have become more competitive, and so they compete quite well with grid extensions and other conventional provision of electricity. What remains as challenge are the regulatory framework. Countries have had now to adapt the conventional electricity regulatory frameworks to make them more enabling for renewable energy powered systems. A lot of countries have been very, very slow at it, and so it sort of slows down the required private sector investment to expand renewable energy powered electricity access systems. And so one key activity that some of us are promoting is to get African governments to make the entry of the private investor into energy access powered by green sources, so that that expansion will go much faster than what is going out now. We a couple of years ago targeted universal access to energy by 2020 for most African countries under the UN system. We kept on pushing it forward. Now the the target is for universal access by 2030, which happens to be only 8 years away. And without an enabling environment by way of policy, by way of offering lighter, something lower than stringent licensing, tariff setting, and other regulatory requirements in favor of renewable energy powered systems. If that is not sort of pushed harder than we're doing right now, getting the universal access by 2020 would be a big challenge for us.
Yeah. That is, I mean, time is quickly running out.
Yes, and I'll also add another dimension which most of the time is overlooked. Quite apart from pursuing policy improvements, enabling regulatory systems, the awareness and the public education on the wisdom in pushing green energy into our electricity supply systems is very, very low. So for most African countries, and for that matter, most developing countries, whilst pursuing lighter regulatory regimes for green energy, the target group or the beneficiaries, end users of energy are the ordinary households, the ordinary small enterprises that depend on energy. They need to be educated, they need to be made aware about, I keep referring to the wisdom of pursuing green energy sources now for a brighter future for not just us, but our children and our children's children. And so public awareness and education is also something that governments must see the wisdom in spending money on, because the benefits cannot be measured in terms of money. They are so big. Yeah.
Great, yes. So it's not only policy improvements or the business enabling environment, it's also sensitization and awareness within, from the position of the end user. And I wanted to maybe go into the informal sector, and maybe you can give us an understanding of the interaction with energy. What does it mean to be able to deploy energy to the informal sector? Is it about rural energy access, or is it about urban solutions?
In fact, the issue of productive uses of energy is very, very important whilst we are pushing expanded energy access, particularly to rural communities. Thus far, households especially, and even small-scale enterprises, get excited with taking advantage of electricity connection to their homes only to consumption for comfort, provision of lighting, to provide some light in darkness for the children to study, and also for the households to be able to move about and do something more substantial in the evenings. But again, some enabling environment needs to be created. Facilities and products need to be made available. And again, public education of rural communities who get the advantage of having electricity connected to them, to see that energy is not just for comfort. Energy is for generation of jobs. Energy is for expansion of productive activities. And so we would expect that when some effort has been made to extend electricity to a rural community not connected to the grid, barbers will resort to the use of solar panels. Hairdressers will take advantage of that, and also expand their services with the use of a dependable and dedicated source of energy through solar panels. I just went on a study visit to some areas in Uganda, and then there is this remote, island community, which has had the privilege of support to get just 100 kilowatt system from solar energy, and you could see the happiness and the joy of improved life in this village, because they have a cold store which provides fresh, frozen fish. But this particular place is on the bank of the Victoria Lake in Uganda, and they can store, a good stock of fish, almost to the doorstep of households. They have a pet fuel service station in this remote place, and we even saw a welder's shop using solar energy to be able to be making at least some of the parts, metal parts for building and for other structures. And so the productive uses of energy should also be promoted whilst we are pushing green energy sources, because it is the productive uses which will make the economic sense for getting the private sector to invest in green energy, because the utility bills will not be coming from just the using of lighting and radios and ceiling fans, but to be coming from fewer service stations with a higher energy consumption and therefore higher revenue, to whichever private sector see the economic and commercial wisdom in investing in extension of energy access through green sources.
Yeah, thank you. That's so well defined, because a lot of the solar solutions are usually with lighting or battery charging your phones, and if you're able to sort of create awareness around the possible revenue streams from going into productive uses of energy, then that could be a way of energizing the private sector to invest. But then maybe I suppose it's a matter of scale, is it? When it comes to energy access, and renewables. And so, as we're talking about the informal sector, it's smaller scale, and that's where these innovations come in. But what about at the larger scale, in terms of the grid, the energy grid, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the sort of fears are in terms of having stable electricity, and what is limiting large scale renewable energy expansion.
Well, talking of the larger scale situations, should I say, the non-continuous supply of electricity, particularly from solar sources. The technologies are readily available to sort of manage that system, including the opportunity to use some battery systems which can store the energy whilst the sun is not up, and then for the controllers, or the managers of the grid, to be able to quickly dispatch sources from green areas like solar, because with the battery system, it doesn't have to happen in the daytime where the sun is up, but technologies are available smooth dispatch of green sources, running parallel to conventional sources from the thermal plant and other similar sources. So we have the technology to sort of offset those challenges with the interrupting, nature of green energy sources.
Okay, great. I suppose we tend to focus on the limitations, the challenges, rather than the opportunities. And but those limitations, those challenges offer opportunities, in fact, for new technologies such as systems to mitigate those interruptions.
Yeah.
From the continental perspective, I wondered if you maybe had some insights on what just transitions means for the continent. And we hear the idea of leapfrogging, that we should leave our resources in the ground, our oil and coal in the ground, and leapfrog to renewables. However, many African countries will say that they already have a renewable leaning energy mix. For example, some countries, let's say Zambia, for instance, is mostly uses hydroelectricity, about 80% for the grid. So I just wanted your opinion on, from the African context, what this transition means for us and what we should be doing, how we should manage our resources.
Well, for countries which already have high energy access, we admit that the scope for transitioning to green sources is relatively reduced. But countries which still have quite some work to do to get into high energy access, I think this is their time. This is the opportunity that when you're confronted with either expanding your energy access through conventional means, through thermal plants, using hydrocarbons, with the other option of making equally effective, equally dependable sources of electricity through green sources. This is the time to make that good decision. Because as we said, the transition drive is a forward ever activity. There's no way, with the kind of level of understanding and level of acceptance by politicians, there's not going to be a turning back. So African governments should be empowered, and they will only get empowered if the comparative numbers are shown in very, very simple terms. That here you are as a country, national energy access is about 40%. It's probably 70% in the capital city and other large cities. But then it drops as low in many cases to almost less than 16% in rural areas. So if we want a national energy access to move from, say, 40 to 80, if you continue with adding more thermal plants, this is the capital outlay. This is the operating cost, life cycle cost for the next 30 years. If you make an investment into green systems, solar panels, the initial capital outlay might be bigger than in thermal plants, but the operating cost is almost virtually nothing. And so the technocrats, together with the economists, need to help governments to see real numbers, comparative numbers for pursuing energy access through the conventional means, and the other option of pursuing it in green, with green sources, covering the life cycle of the systems, not just the initial cost. So that access to data, comparative data, it's one of the empowering tools that will guide governments to take wise decisions to expand energy access.
Yeah, thank you. And that is very much similar to some of the work that UNRWA has been trying to do. When you can look at the opportunity costs, the benefits and the opportunity costs of switching to renewables, it can be clearer, it can be easier to swallow, I suppose.
Yes.
And yeah, well, so thank you very much for those reflections. And so maybe we can bring it to a close, but I just wanted to maybe ask you overall, based on what you've heard today and last week, with the different initiatives around green transitions in Africa, if you have any reflections or any advice, or if there's anything that you'd like to share.
I'll just repeat what I keep on saying. The target group are the people in the communities. They should understand what all this, initiatives are happening in the first place, and what is in there for them. Once the people, in however simple terms, get to know why some initiatives are being made purportedly to their favor, it sort of opens the project to succeed. Because every now and then, particularly when this project is being scaled up and replicated in other places, people have been aware that this is something for our good. There are some trade-offs, definitely. Everything good has some trade-offs. There's some sort of issues which will bring probably some temporary hardships to some people. But if the whole objective of green transition is broken down into very, very simple terms for even the uneducated to understand the wisdom in having it done, to be very, very surprising. Project promoters will be surprised to see how people on the fringes can sort of open doors and open avenues for projects which are purported to be for their good to succeed. So public awareness and education is very, very important. And even in the rural areas, there are all kinds of conventional and non-conventional platforms to send messages to people in a language and in a package that they understand and can relate to and own it as part of the project or initiative themselves. So that one is very, very important.
Yeah, thank you. That's so well said. I think the ownership is key. Is it relatable to the local context, and also do they see themselves in the vision? So thank you,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Hagan.